In the 80s, I attended a small Christian college in Oklahoma and worked in the dish room to earn tuition money. It was every bit as soggy and gross as you'd imagine. We were all young, dumb, and able to make a game about just about anything. Except living in Oklahoma, we couldn't get over that. The diners were expected to drop their silverware down a chute and then set their trays on top of 1 to 2 separate conveyor belts that would bring each of the dirty dishes, glasses, and leftover food. So much wasted food. Each worker on the line was responsible for grabbing one thing: glasses, plates, or bowls. The speed of the conveyor belts lent an odd sense of urgency or challenge to the proceedings for us workers. Since college students can be jerk faces, they found many ways to torture us poor saps in the dish room. A few of the lowlights include food condiment sculptures, using peanut butter to glue many plates or bowls together, many glasses full of stuff on one tray. It looked like blood, but it may have been ketchup, and several tables leaving in unison and placing way too many trays on one belt. If you put too many trays on the belt slows down. The belt cannot function correctly. It breaks, and a technician has to come in and fix the belt. We cannot have the belt breaking. That's what they told me. They told me that if the belt broke one more time, they were terminating every employee, shutting this place down, and turning it into a Long John Silver's. All of these hilarious hijinks were done by good, God-fearing kids. But one stunt stands out above all the others. Some evil bastard smeared honey on a tray, then flipped a glass full of ice onto the honey. The honey hardened and fastened the glass to the tray. The first time I witnessed this act of repulsive jackassery was repeated too often throughout the year. The person responsible for the glasses was a sweet little church mouse of a girl who never said more than hi to me. We were buried by the dinner rush and moving as fast as possible when a honey glass, quote-unquote, came through. My coworker grabbed the glass, yanked toward her, and pulled the entire tray off the conveyor belt. Wet food splashed up upon her apron and face. Plates and bowls hit the ground and shattered, and the glass ended up breaking in her gloved hand. We were horrified. Crystallized, fossilized bees lay in the honey, in the blood-covered honey. We screamed as all of a sudden the door opened. A large, 1,400-pound grizzly bear, covered in blood, with 6 eyes, began attacking the restaurant patrons. They began eating and smacking and attacking the restaurant patrons, who were all covered in honey. Someone had smeared honey all over the walls, over the floor, all over the roof. Everything was covered in honey. I screamed as bees and honey covered everything. What in God's name? What in God's name was going on? That mousy girl smiled at me. It was a devious smile, and then the bear came for me. He slowly started chewing on my intestines as I screamed, and I hit the button to turn the conveyor belt on. We were both led through the conveyor belt, as the conveyor belt crushed and picked up the plates, and the conveyor belt lifted both of us up, and it was jammed. The conveyor belt became jammed with blood and bear guts and my guts, and that was when a demonic park ranger came in. It was my boss. My boss was a park ranger. I shuddered. He took out a 12-gauge shotgun and shot the bear, and shot at me, and he shot the bear. We were both covered in bloody buckshot. I screamed in horror as the bear was dead, but his mouth would not open. He had died chewing on my intestines. My one intestine dangling out of my rib cage was in his mouth. And I screamed. I said, "Let go of that!" I beat the bear on the head. "Let it go, jerk!" Finally, the park ranger pried it open, and then he smiled. He told me that the woman that he had sent to do all of this was part of a cleanup crew, a government experiment being conducted on lowly food server employees who could not follow standard protocols, and this was the test. He informed me that we had failed, and he pressed a button, and 10 billion bees began flooding the building. It was more bees than I had ever seen. And I couldn't see them because I had bees in my eyes. I had bees in my eyes, bees in my ears, bees in my mouth, bees in my throat, bees in my lungs. I had bees in my lungs. I had bees in my bloodstream. There were just bees everywhere. It was a lot of bees. Too many bees. And then he said, and then he says to me, he says, "By the way, you're fired." And he picked up the restaurant tray and smashed it on my head. He smashed it on my head. It was extremely painful. As I waded through a sewer line full of bees, I had to escape. I had to escape through the back, and there were a lot of bees. It was just too many freaking bees. And I later found out that a man they call the beekeeper, who was the CEO of the company, he had called a hit on me because I had found out too much. I had found out too much about the... I was later placed in a large honeycomb-shaped coffin and buried 6 feet behind the restaurant. I had to claw my way through pounds and pounds of milky bee honeycombs. I used the honeycombs for sustenance as I clawed and climbed and clambered and tried to get out of that hellish state of being. And when I finally reached the top, when I finally made it out with my mortal soul, you know what they told me? They didn't tell me anything. I merely had to look. I screamed in horror as I lifted the tile, bleeding, bruised, covered in bees, my intestines and bare teeth stuck inside my tattered flesh. It was a Long John Silver's. They had changed the place into a Long John Silver's. The restaurant patrons screamed in horror, as now I was the zombie, the creature of the night. They threw their fish sandwiches at me, screaming in horror. Hot, baked fish goods, as men in HVAC suits, holding fishing poles, carefully launched. They were the Long John Silver's emergency cleanup task crew, and they launched a barrage of fish hooks at me, pulling me in, and I wasn't allowed to come back. I was banned. I was banned from Long John Silver's.